Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa and I am the Indigenous representative at the Douglas Students Union.
And I'm Nikhil, your Director of College Relations at the Douglas Students Union. And welcome to our Provincial Q&A leading up to the October 24th Election Day.
We are meeting candidates from the different parties in the New Westminster and Coquitlam-Burke Mountain electoral districts, asking them questions to get to know them better, where they stand on issues that are most important to Douglas students, all to help inform your vote.
Today, we are with Jennifer Whiteside from the NDP party, running in the New Westminster riding. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Something on all students' mind is school and how they are going to pay for it as post-secondary education is becoming more and more expensive. How will you and your party make post-secondary education more affordable and more accessible for all students?
Well, that's a very important question, Vanessa. And let me just say before I start how wonderful I think it is that the Douglas College Student Union is organizing this event to make sure that that your constituents are sort of aware of what's at stake in this election, and that they're engaged, can be engaged in the political process. I think that's really terrific. So good on you folks for organizing this. You know, I was a student at Douglas. I grew up in New Westminster, and I was a student at Douglas many years ago. And I remember what it was like to have to accumulate debt in order to pay for my studies. When I graduated from university, eventually from SFU, and throughout that period, I'd amassed a debt of in excess of $20,000, and it took a long time for me to pay that off. And I know that today, students are graduating with an average debt load of $35,000, and I mean that is just not sustainable. I mean that's a down payment on housing in many communities. So it's a very affordability, accessibility are issues that are very key, and the BC NDP have taken some very significant steps on addressing accessibility of post-secondary education. They've eliminated interest on student loans, very important. They've eliminated tuition on adult basic education. And that I have to say, I feel was one of the more punitive cuts during the BC Liberal era, meaning that, you know, folks who needed to access basic training basic education had to pay for it themselves, and often, you know, weren't going to be able to do that. They eliminated tuition for children who have been in the foster care system and are sort of, you know, emerging from that system to help them get a good start. And this year, they brought back a grant program, which we haven't seen in this province since the Liberals cut it in the early 2000s. So the BC Access Grant Program was introduced this year. It will be in the next NDP majority government. It will be expanded so that students will save about $4,000 a year through that program. You know, I mean, I'm a real advocate for accessibility, and I know that there are very many ways in which we can implement policy to help with that. It is about all of the things we've talked about, and it's also about textbooks. And I know that the student movement has been a real leader in, and Douglas in particular, in pushing for open educational resources. And this government, the BC NDP government in their last term, invested over $3 million to assist in the creation of open textbooks. And when I was on campus last week visiting and talking with the students, I know that was a real issue that came up as a barrier. So I think there are a number of different ways, number of different commitments, number of good things that have been done, much more to do.
A big concern that is on a lot of young people's minds, and that is housing. You know, a lot of young people are having a hard time to find affordable housing, affordable places to rent, and many believe that they will never have the option to afford homes once they finish study, when they enter the workforce, or even ever. What will you do to make sure that young people have access to affordable housing when they graduate?
That is such an important issue for post-secondary students, for young people, for many people. I mean, and that is a situation that got completely out of control for British Columbians under the BC Liberals. I absolutely agree that housing is critical. Access to safe and secure and stable housing is critical. The BC NDP government has invested in funding programs for institutions to support institutions, educational institutions build student housing. That's one important aspect of housing. But of course, lots of students don't live on campus. They're living elsewhere. And so I think that the rent freeze that is in our platform that we are committing to in the next government, a rent freeze through 2021, and then capping rent increases at inflation thereafter. I think that is a very important commitment. I would say too that we're going to introduce the renters rebate, the $400 renters rebate. That was a policy that we tried to implement, but was unfortunately didn't have the support of the Greens. So in the context of the minority government, we weren't able to implement that measure. But we've got it on the books for sure for this time, and with the majority government, we'll be able to make that really important policy change. Over the BC NDP has a 10-year housing plan, and that housing plan is really focused on delivering 114,000 affordable housing units. Those are very significant investments, and it requires a number of different sort of policy mechanisms to be able to deliver on that. From the speculation tax, which was a really important tool to use to improve housing accessibility and utilization of housing that was sitting vacant, to making investments in all sorts of different levels of housing. You know, I mean, under the BC Liberals, we saw housing prices rise by something like in excess of like over 50%. The trend line was way up. 3 years of a BC NDP government brought that increase live, sort of flattened that curve to about, you know, a much slower increase of about 3.2% in terms of overall housing prices. So there are a number of different ways that we need to be working to make housing more affordable, to build more of it, and to make sure that it's accessible. But I'd say, you know, 16 years of complete neglect of our housing market has meant that the needs of regular people have been pretty much ignored, and there's a lot of work for us to do, and many very important commitments in our platform around how we'll move to correct that.
So the pandemic has changed so many aspects of our lives. As the world moves forward towards developing a vaccine and creating long-term recovery plans, how will your recovery plan meet the needs of current students and recent graduates, especially those looking for meaningful employment and work?
Yeah, boy, I mean, we live in a fundamentally different world now than we did 7 months ago at the outset of the global COVID-19 pandemic. You know, at the height of the pandemic in the spring, in British Columbia alone, we lost close to 400,000 jobs. And over the course of the summer, as we flattened the curve, we regained about 62% of those jobs. But it's really clear that we are undergoing a massive upheaval in our economy, a massive upheaval in our labor force as well. And I know that young people were particularly affected in the service and retail sector, for example, by the shutdown. So you know, that is, and there are different industries, different parts of our economy are recovering at different paces. So we really have to ensure that our economic recovery from COVID is a just recovery. And what we mean when we say a just recovery, that means that we need to ensure that people, that workers, that their communities, small businesses are at the center of that recovery, and that we're thinking of all of those groups as we develop plans and move forward. And for me, really, that is about ensuring stability in the labor market and security for workers as we ensure that workers have access to the training that they need if they need to move into a different industry, for example. Because we do have growing and emerging industries that will need workers, and we need to line all of that up. For example, in healthcare, there's an immediate commitment by the BC to add 7,000 new FTEs to our healthcare system, and that's to support with seniors care, which is a sector of our healthcare system that is very embattled by COVID and needs a lot more support. But that's also about other kinds of other kinds of jobs across our acute care sector as well. So, and healthcare generally, it's a growing sector, and we see that our platform, our leader John Horgan announced a number of really important things around healthcare, a 10-year cancer plan, which is going to need to be supported by new infrastructure as well as workers. A new medical school. We're going to have a second medical school in this province, which I think is very exciting in terms of youth looking to get educated to work in some aspect of our healthcare sector. So for sure, our recovery is very much going to be about taking care of the health and well-being of people and of our communities. High tech is another really big area of investment. And I know, just to say too, that Douglas College is a very important educator of people in our healthcare workforce in particular. I think there are other mechanisms around needing to support workers with paid sick leave and such to ensure that that the conditions that young people, all workers are working in are safe and stable. And our leader, John Horgan, as Premier, he was a fierce defender and advocate for paid sick leave at the federal level. And, we've seen some really concrete action as a result of that.
Another important topic that is also on the forefront of many people's minds these days, including students, is the environment and creating a long-term system to protect our world and the future. What is the first steps you will take to tackling climate change?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because I think that question really underpins everything these days. Certainly underpins how we're all feeling about our experience through COVID. As we were just about to embark on the election, of course, we were dealing with the California wildfire smoke here in New Westminster, and that was a very visceral reminder that. The climate's cross borders, and we need very strong and determined and concrete action. And so the Clean BC plan developed by John Horgan's government is the most ambitious climate action plan in Canada, and it speaks to the platform that we've introduced. Really speaks to the number of different ways in which we will implement that plan. So that plan was initially sort of based on the overall goal of reducing emissions by 40% by 2030. But the platform commitment is now to meet that target and then reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. And when I look at the commitments we need to make and how we actually need to act in order to make that happen, it really requires sort of a whole of government approach. We need to be thinking about everything that we do in government through the lens of, does this help us meet our climate targets? So in terms of the transit plan, the massive investments in transit, the announcement this morning made about the extending SkyTrain to Langley, so we can move more people and not have to have people rely on cars. Supporting a public transit system that's really been hit hard by COVID, and making sure that we have that we stabilize our transit investments so that they're not at risk as they rebuild ridership after COVID. Working with the construction industry, with developers, to make sure we've got green construction happening. I think too that continuing to work on reconciliation with First Nations peoples is very, very important. It's also sort of another kind of fundamental lens through which we need to see this work, and I think it's absolutely related to climate change. It has to be related to everything that we do. Supporting our economy in terms of the development of towards science and technology, and really emphasizing science and technology. So we're going to have another 2,000 educational seats in our post-secondary sector focused on science and technology to help us develop green technologies. That's really important. And I guess the final thing I would say just about this whole approach, as we come out of COVID, and we will come out of COVID. I know we're sort of going to maybe be into it for a while yet, but when we do get to the other side, and as we are building our post-COVID recovery, we have to do that in a way that ensures a just recovery for everybody, that includes everybody, that brings everybody along, that is based on fundamental principles around equity, around reconciliation, around addressing our climate goals. It's an opportunity really to move forward in a way that builds a really quality, stable, safe life for everybody, not just prioritizing the wealthiest amongst us. I mean, that is what I think is so important about the commitment that John Horgan and the BC NDP have made throughout this platform, is that it is really a people's platform. It's about people and for people. So that is that's why we're here. Those are the fundamental issues we're going to continue to advocate for.
So students at Douglas live in many different regions throughout the Lower Mainland, regularly traveling to and from campus from their studies, sometimes being forced to look for housing further and further away because of rising costs. What measures will you implement to address transportation challenges faced by students, such as high insurance costs for young people and increased access to transit beyond the immediate Greater Vancouver area?
Yeah, and I presaged my answer there a bit on the transit issues, because there are some very significant commitments in our platform around both expanding SkyTrain, but also expanding transit and investing in public transit outside of the Lower Mainland, where we know there are sort of some very transit poor parts of our province where students don't have the benefit of relying on a strong public transit network. So there are commitments about building that. I mean, in terms of the, I know that there are ways in which we are making investments and trying to bring balance back to ICBC to address the dumpster fire situation that ICBC was left in, and I think that work will be ongoing. There is also, just in terms of supporting, sort of in the short term, supporting people, British Columbians and their families as we work to get through the next sort of part of COVID. There is a sort of pandemic support fund that will be made available to British Columbians. $100,000 for families, sort of on a sliding scale, earning up to $125,000. $500 for up to $500 for individuals. And I look at that very much in the light of the resources that the federal government made available in partnership with provinces to essential workers, because there's just no question that everybody's been dealing with additional costs related to COVID, whether it's having to buy masks or more hand sanitizers or take taxis sometimes, or whatever it is. There's been that impact. So the NDP are going to do everything that they can to support people through this.
Great. And that is all we have time for today at our Q&A. Thank you, Jennifer Whiteside of the NDP, running in the new Westminster riding, for finding time to chat with us today and sharing your platform with students. Good luck on your campaign and on election day.
Thanks very much. It was really lovely to meet you. Bye, everybody.
Hey, everyone. If you've not pledged to vote yet, head over to takeitover.ca to pledge today.